A man for the poor and a reformer, Pope Francis is being remembered as the People's Pope.
For him, the key issue was, how do we care for people? I mean, he said to priests, you need to have the smell of the sheep about you.
On the question of retiring, he wrote in his autobiography this year, "The Pope's ministry is for life. I see no justification for giving it up." And to the end, Pope Francis was true to his word.
He was a person who was going to die with his boots on, like it or lump it.
A relative outsider when he was elected in 2013, Jorge Mario Bergoglio sought to open up the church under his leadership.
Preghiamo sempre per noi, l'uno per l'altro. Preghiamo per tutto il mondo, perché ci sia una grande fratellanza.
And he moved to change the church's attitude to contentious issues among Catholics like divorce, abortion and homosexuality, albeit cautiously.
The most fundamental thing he's done as Pope is to shift that emphasis away from a focus on what one might loosely call ideological issues, theoretical issues about how you should be, to in fact what the reality of human life is and where the church is in the service of people in life.
Pope Francis was really a pope for our times. He's moved things on in the church, and he's been incredibly pastoral, to marginalised groups in a way that previous popes haven't been.
Coming from Argentina, Pope Francis broke Vatican tradition by being the first pope born outside of Europe in more than 1,000 years, and the first from Latin America. And with that, he tried to broaden the church's appeal to more followers globally.
The growth areas for Catholicism is Africa and Asia. And what Pope Francis did was to draw those people in, and he has appointed cardinals from country after country. I mean, just in our own region, there's a cardinal in Tonga, there's a cardinal in Dili in Timor-Leste.
Certainly the many trips he's done around the world and his acknowledgement of the different contexts that Catholics live across the world, again, unprecedented in recent papacies.
Pope Francis expanded the role of women in the church by elevating them to senior positions. But he stopped short of allowing them to be ordained as priests or deacons. In 2023, at a key Vatican summit, women and lay people were given voting rights to have more say in church affairs.
Having lay people, particularly women, have a vote empowered not just the women who were there in the meeting, but Catholics all around the world felt a sense of hope and optimism that their views were being included in the meeting.
In 2019, the Pope publicly called out the sexual abuse of nuns by priests and bishops.
Il maltratto delle donne è un problema. Io oserei dire che la umanità ancora non ha maturato. La donna è di seconda classe. Cominciamo da qua, no? È un problema.
None of the papacies had actually acknowledged this, and so Pope Francis did that in quite a remarkable way.
To address the scourge of child abuse within the Church, Pope Francis set up the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors in 2014. Work, he said, the Church must continue.
The Archbishop of Brisbane, Mark Coleridge, joins me now. Welcome to 7:30, Archbishop.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Good to be with you.
Can you tell us what this moment means to you and to the Church?
Well, there's a great sense of surprise, first of all, because really the surprises kept coming till the very end. His election was, to me, astonishing. I was doing media commentary at the time. I didn't see him coming. And then that appearance on the balcony of St. Peter's, where again he appeared yesterday, just before he died. But when he appeared just wearing the white soutane, and all he said was "Buonasera," good evening. You expect something a little more elevated from a new pope. And then extraordinarily, you may remember, he bowed down and asked the people to pray for him before he gave them the blessing. And there was a silence in St. Peter's Square that I will never forget. So the surprises came right at the start. They came unceasingly, really, through the pontificate. All kinds of surprises. And then he dies on Easter Monday, which in Rome is the most sacred public holiday of the year. Everyone goes out into the countryside for a picnic. So to die on Easter Monday, again, was a total surprise. It was for me. I was myself enjoying a day off, and I come back to the house where I am now, and I'm told the Pope has died. So he was an astonishing figure. And I'm reminded of a conversation I had at World Youth Day some years ago in Rio de Janeiro with one of the Argentinian bishops. And he said to me, as Pope, Bergoglio is turning out to be completely different than he was in Argentina. Because he said in Argentina, he never smiled in public, and now he can't stop smiling. And he never gave interviews, and now he can't stop giving interviews. He said something's happened to the man. So I think there was something happened in his life when he was elected to the papacy. For some men, the papacy can be an imprisonment. For others, it can be a liberation. And I think for Jorge Bergoglio, Pope Francis, it did seem to be some kind of liberation. He made the job seem easy, whereas Pope Benedict before him made the job seem almost undoable.
Sorry, you go on.
No, well, he just, the way he broke free of the protocols of the papal court, I say this as one who worked there, that was astonishing, because those protocols are powerful and deeply rooted. But he had about him a kind of an inner freedom. He didn't worry what people thought or said about him. He was prepared to do what he thought had to be done. And that required a deep-seated inner freedom, which is a very Jesuit thing, very Jesuit theme. And he was a very Jesuit pope.
What was it like to be with him? Because you've met him a number of times. Tell me what it's like to be in his presence.
Well, the first thing that struck me, and I think struck many, was how informal he was. Again, breaking free of these protocols of the papal court. See, he wasn't a monarch. I mean, Pope John Paul II and Pope Benedict XVI were not regal figures by nature, but they were part of a courtly culture. Pope Francis broke free of all of that. So the sense of informality, the sense that this is a brother you're talking to, not a monarch, not a super bishop, but a bishop with bishops, a brother, which is why when I wrote to him over time, I addressed him as Holy Father and dear brother. And it was that combination that you sensed. And there was always a brightness in his eye. He never seemed an old man when you stood face to face with him.
Now,
and he had a lovely sense of humour and wasn't afraid to show it.
You just referenced the two previous popes. There's going to be lots of discussion in the days to come about the extent to which he changed the Catholic Church. He came in with different ideas about the Church. To what extent was he, in the end, able to change, to reform the Catholic Church?
Well, he didn't have a magic wand, and he was the first to recognise that. But what he did was set in motion processes, many of which, it seems to me, will be very hard to stop. Now, there were deep-seated continuities with both John Paul II and Benedict XVI. So you wouldn't want to overstate the differences. But there were significant differences, in a sense that the heart of the differences was that Pope Francis was supremely a pastor and wanted to listen to people's story. He didn't have all the answers, but he was prepared to listen, to journey with people, to accompany people. That was one of his favourite words. And to set in motion processes, even if he didn't in his lifetime see the end of those processes. He has started some very powerful processes which I think will be very hard to turn back.
Just explain, Archbishop, what you mean by that. What is precisely different?
A church that includes rather than excludes. That's where I would start. See, the great vision that drove this pontificate, this was the fire in the belly, was a vision of the unity of all things in God. All human beings, but the whole of the creation. I mean, it was a big, big vision. And he had an amazing ability to articulate the big vision with a poet's feel for language, vivid metaphors, the church as a field hospital, for instance. And I could give you 100 other examples. He had a very potent, metaphoric way of speaking, and you see it in his preaching. But it was the language of a pastor, not a professor, and not even a prophet, although there were prophetic aspects, I think, of his ministry.
Let me just ask you one. If I may, I just wanted to ask you one question because we'll sadly run out of time, Archbishop, hearing these stories. To what extent did he change the role of women in the church?
I think he set in motion a process that will lead, God only knows where, but it will lead to greater inclusion. Again, the process has begun. It certainly hasn't ended. But where it will go is very hard to say, because Pope Francis would say it depends on the Holy Spirit, not on the Pope of Rome. And that was another fundamental theme of his pontificate, that he was the servant of God. It wasn't the old Argentinian Jesuit up in his garret having bright ideas. He was listening to the voice of God and speaking out of that experience and trying to draw the church into an experience of listening, not only to God but to each other. In other words, a church that doesn't speak before it listens, but listens and then speaks.
Archbishop Coleridge, obviously we've a lot more to learn about what's happened, the achievements of this Pope, but on this particular day, and with our condolences to you, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you very much, Sarah. May God rest the Pope and let him rise in glory. Thank you.
Thank you. The Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, delivered a statement a short time ago.
Australian Catholics and faithful around the world give thanks for the life of their Holy Father, Pope Francis, Bishop of Rome. Today, the prayers of more than 1 billion people from all nations and every walk of life go with Pope Francis to his rest. His was a papacy of firsts, the first Pope to hail from the Americas, the first Jesuit Pope, and the first to take the name of that great champion of the poor, St. Francis of Assisi.
The ABC's Geraldine Doog joins me now. Geraldine, you haven't had long to react to this moment, but if it's possible to sum up what this means in terms of where the church is now. I'll come to what happens next, but where are we now?
Well, for lay people, I think it's whether this whole process of drawing lay people in more for co-responsibility, it sounds a bit of a sort of a cliche, that is what is at stake. Which is a sort of a long-term continuation of Vatican II. Will a new Pope seek to reverse that in any shape or form, or will he give it legs to take it further forward? That's what I'm looking for.
So that's the question, and in fact Coleridge is referring to that being a process. Now, we didn't talk about it there, but clearly there were many conservatives in the Vatican who did not welcome that change to the church in terms of the way the rights of the church are celebrated, but also that inclusivity you're talking about, including women, including his blessing of gay people, of same-sex couples. So what happens to those forces now? Are they unleashed, or is it too late, really, to go back to the status quo ante?
You can never say it's too late to go back in the Catholic Church. I think, in fact, like this being reported in America will be a very different set of reports.
Explain that to the audience.
So, in other words, there were very strong forces, very, very well cashed up forces in America who constantly tried to undermine Pope Francis. And I might, they did some real damage. So I will be fascinated to see how the USA reports this, because there are a lot of them that thought he was almost the Antichrist. So again, we're going to see this, it is a sort of culture war in a way, being played out via the Catholic Church. He received J.D. Vance the other day, which was a very, I don't know whether that really helped his morale, but so his whole process of trying to to make more people responsible for the future of the Catholic Church, heavily influenced by the Plenary Council in Australia, heavily influenced. That is what is at stake.
Just talk about that. Where did that influence come from? Where was it felt?
Well, in the Synod and Synodality, I was in Rome last year reporting on it. And, I mean, it was fascinating to see the round tables. Like, Roman conversations are very structured. This was round tables as if you were at a conference, any sort of normal conference in a hotel, which is exactly what our plenary Synod summit did do. So they very definitely borrowed from what had worked in Australia. In fact, the Australian Catholic Church has got some genuine influence in Rome, but whether it will with a new man, that's what we don't know. Now,
there's obviously a lot of discussion today about the nature of the man, the fact that he lived a frugal life, certainly compared to his immediate predecessor. How much do we know about that, the simplicity of the life that he led while holding this extraordinary position? Well,
look, I never met him. I watched the impact he had in Rome. It sort of stunned me in a way. I didn't expect to see it, people lining up, loads and loads of long lines on the possibility that he would be there. And then if he came, there was sort of general mayhem. You know what I think is interesting? I think he had been through some terrible troubles, real travail. And I think that this is going to be one of the legacies that he learned. Like, he had times when he went to the bottom. He didn't think he had a future. He was reviled by some of his Jesuits because of behaviour, things that happened during the Pinochet regime. It wasn't... He'd known real setbacks in a big way.
A hard journey.
Very much.
We've much to learn over the next few days in the celebration of his life. Geraldine, in the meantime, thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.